Wake up now. Subscribe to my channel, comment and like. Now pay attention.
Democracy is a mirage. They taught you that you lived in a democracy, that your vote was a spear in the battle for the future, that you decided. But what they never told you is that this decision was designed in advance, like a magician's trick that never fails because the result is fixed before the show begins. More than a century ago, Karl Marx, with the precision of an anatomist and the harshness of a judge, dissected this lie. He showed that bourgeois democracy is not the government of the people, but the most elegant disguise of capitalist domination. The actors changed, yes, the scenery too. But the script, the preservation of power and wealth in the hands of a minority, remains the same, ever more polished, more efficient, more profitable. Marx did not speak from rhetoric but from material reality. He saw what many still refuse to see. Whoever finances the campaigns buys the laws. And whoever buys the laws governs even if they never sit in a parliament. Behind every electoral smile lie contracts signed in the shadows, deals sealed with money that ensures nothing essential will change. That is the first great betrayal, selling hope to the poor while secretly negotiating the maintenance of their chains. Since the birth of the modern state, the farce repeats itself. Politicians who promise social justice, proclaim themselves defenders of the people, and then, when legislating, sign decrees that shield fortunes, protect private property, and reward the very elites who sustain them. The law, which should be the hammer of the people, becomes the shield of the bourgeoisie. This is not a distortion of democracy. It is its essence. The system is not corrupted, it was born corrupt. And when the people believe they can change something with their vote, the second layer of illusion comes into play. As long as the ruling class owns the means of production and controls information, the entire political field is contaminated from its roots. There can be countless debates, ballots, and parties. Nothing changes if those who challenge the order are silenced, marginalized, or ridiculed. Elections become nothing more than a contest among different managers of the same capitalist casino. And as in every casino, the house always wins. The secret of its endurance lies in a subtler power, the control of consciousness. The elite, with its media machinery and its factory of illusions, builds the story everyone repeats. The rich create jobs. Without entrepreneurs, there is no progress. We need stability. Translation: obey. Or do not question. And so millions of the oppressed end up defending those who exploit them, convinced that their misery is their own fault and not the result of the system that devours them. That is the most perverse betrayal, not merely breaking promises, but shaping the people's minds to make them grateful for their chains. Politicians are only the visible faces of a much deeper, invisible yet omnipresent power, capital. And as long as that power remains intact, every so-called democracy will remain nothing but a pretty word to disguise modern servitude. The machine of power. Behind every politician, behind every speech about freedom or progress, there are faces that never appear on the ballots. Bankers, magnates, heirs of fortunes, heads of corporations. They are the ones who dictate the rhythm of social life. If something threatens their privileges, it dies before it is even born. Marx, with his relentless method, had already said it. What drives this elite is neither reason nor justice, but fear. The fear that workers will realize that liberal democracy is not a field of equality, but a gilded prison. The fear that the poor, united at last, will discover that they need neither saviors nor intermediaries, only organization and courage to break their chains. History has proven it time and again. Neither the state nor institutional politics are instruments of liberation. They are walls built to protect privilege. As long as economic inequality exists, all political representation will be representation of the rich. That is the first wound Marx exposed with surgical precision. If reading this stirs anger or discomfort, congratulations, you are beginning to see the trick. The belief in a state that serves the people is the masterpiece of bourgeois manipulation. It is not an error, nor an ethical deviation that can be fixed by placing good people in power. It is a system designed to shield the interests of a minority. And it is so efficient that it continues to function election after election, even when outrage floods the streets. The machine of power needs no noise, it works in silence. The vote, in this scenario, becomes a hollow ritual, a theater where the audience applauds without realizing that the ending is already written. Its gears are both visible and invisible. Visible: the laws that strip away rights, the budgets that favor the wealthy, the tax reforms that burden the poor with the cost of other people's fortunes. Invisible: the agreements signed behind closed doors, the clauses that sell off strategic sectors of the country, the international treaties that open the gates to exploitation. The real power is not televised, it is negotiated at tables where workers will never have a seat. And here lies the masterstroke. They made you believe your vote was a weapon, but they turned it into wet gunpowder. Marx explained it clearly: the act of voting under capitalism is controlled from its very origin. Who decides who may run for office? Who funds the campaigns? Who controls the media that build the candidate's image? Who pays for the polls that predict the outcome? Always the same ones, the elite. An elite that does not fear elections because no matter who wins, its power remains intact. Voting under such conditions is like choosing the cook without ever touching the owner of the restaurant. The feast will always be served to the same guests. This is not pessimism. It is materialist analysis. As long as the means of production and communication remain in few hands, politics will serve those hands. You can change the actors, but the stage, the script, and the director never move. And when, on rare occasions, someone arises who dares to break the cycle, the machine responds with fury. Funds are cut. Reputations destroyed. Rumors fabricated. Justice manipulated. Journalists bought. Data falsified. The bourgeois state is not neutral. It is, as Marx wrote, the executive committee of the ruling class. Even the courts, regulatory agencies, and oversight institutions are built to ensure that nothing fundamental changes. But the machine feeds not only on money but also on fatigue, distraction, and belief. The harder life becomes for the worker, the less time they have to think about their oppression. And meanwhile, the system throws crumbs, superficial reforms, temporary programs, to calm anger without touching the root. It is the executioner's medicine, painkillers for a tumor. The final trap is not the system's violence but its narrative. Believing that the vote changes everything is its greatest ideological triumph. That is why Marx insisted, emancipation will not come from above, nor through rules imposed by the bourgeoisie. It will come from below, when the oppressed understand that their strength lies not in the ballot box, but in their unity, their consciousness, and their organization. The rebellion born from below. Change will not descend from palaces or parliaments. It will rise from below, from the conscious organization of the working class, from the awakening of those who produce wealth yet receive only crumbs. Only when the oppressed break not just with their rulers, but with the system that created them, will the wheel stop turning. Until then, the machine keeps running. The people vote, the rich celebrate, and the worker's life remains chained to the same unyielding logic, laboring to exhaustion to sustain the privileges of a minority that was never elected, yet governs as if it owned the world. To deny this reality is to condemn oneself to live forever inside the cycle of illusion. The state, that colossus promising to protect rights and guarantee justice, is not the guardian of the people but the fortress of the ruling class. Marx not only denounced this truth, he dissected it. He demonstrated that the capitalist state is not a deviation, but a mechanism built to serve the interests of those who own capital. As long as the means of production remain in private hands, the state will remain their instrument. It is not administrative error, nor occasional corruption. It is structural function. Laws, taxes, subsidies, public institutions, all are shaped to protect property, profits, and privilege. Behind every technical decision lies a web of interests invisible to the distracted eye. Corporations dictate parliamentary agendas, craft tailor-made environmental laws, secure tax benefits that perpetuate their dominance. The state is bought, not with visible money but with influence, promises, and favors that pass through ministries and parliaments alike. Thus, the discourse of equality becomes a worn-out mask. Equality of opportunity, that mantra repeated by politicians and businessmen, is merely a formula to lull protest to sleep. How can there be equality where access to education, health, or justice depends on wealth? Equality of opportunity in an unequal system is not justice. It is the elegant reproduction of inequality. The rulers know this and they use it. They play with the people's hope, offering minimal reforms, temporary subsidies, and campaigns of inclusion that only disguise exploitation. They are painkillers for a wound they refuse to heal. The capture of the state does not stop at the economy. It infects the courts, the oversight bodies, and public institutions. Judges protect fortunes. Regulators serve corporations. And the repressive apparatus turns against the poor who dare to resist. Protest is criminalized, popular leaders persecuted, collective organization mutilated. Thus the state reveals itself for what Marx defined without ambiguity, the executive committee of the bourgeoisie's interests. Until this structure is broken, institutional politics will remain a simulation. Real change will not emerge from ballots or decrees, but from the construction of popular power outside the molds of capital. Until that happens, the promise of equality will remain nothing but a veil covering the cruel face of exploitation. And if this truth unsettles you, if something inside you begins to rebel, you are on the right path. To recognize the trap is the first act of freedom. For the most powerful weapon of the elite has never been the army or money, but the control of consciousness. Marx saw it with clarity. Capitalism dominates not only with economics but with ideas. It controls not only the factories but also meanings. What appears natural, competition, individual success, the necessity of the entrepreneur, is an ideological construction designed to perpetuate servitude. The media, social networks, entertainment, education, all repeat the same dogma. We need the rich. They create jobs. They move the country forward. And so the worker ends up defending his executioner, believing his fate is tied to that of his master. This is the false consciousness Marx spoke of, the invisible prison of the proletariat. Until that prison is broken, the oppressed will keep thanking for crumbs, blaming themselves for their misery, and fearing anything that smells of revolution. But when that consciousness awakens, when fear changes sides, the whole edifice will tremble. For what the powerful fear is not protest, it is organization. And what keeps them safe is not their wealth, it is our resignation. Emancipation will begin the day the people stop believing the promises of their jailers and take hold of the power of their own history. Only then, from below, will true democracy be born. The democracy of those who produce, not of those who own. The farce of representation. The mechanisms of domination are many, but they all converge on the same purpose: to smother the people's rebelliousness. Slandering social leaders, criminalizing protest, repression in the streets, laws that punish popular organization. Everything is designed to etch one idea into the minds of the oppressed: resistance is useless. Institutional violence is neither error nor excess, but a structural component of the capitalist pact. It serves to maintain the illusion of order, to make submission look like common sense. Meanwhile, official discourse keeps painting the system in the colors of progress, justice, and meritocracy. But behind that facade hides the true face of power. The revolution, what Marx defined as the conscious union of the working class, has been turned by the elite into an imaginary monster, a threat to the supposed well-being they themselves destroy. Thus the poor are kept in an endless cycle of fear and false hope, trapped between empty promises and manufactured terrors. This is the most effective function of political treachery, to prevent the people from discovering that real power resides in their own organization. The myth of democratic representation is perhaps the masterpiece of bourgeois manipulation. The idea that the elected govern, in the name of the people, is the most elegant disguise for class domination. Marx unmasked it without hesitation. As long as the economy is governed by inequality and concentrated wealth, politics will always be the politics of the rich. Representation in this context is nothing more than a farce legitimized by the vote. The word representation sounds noble, but for Marx it is only a silent contract. The rich finance, select, and protect their own intermediaries, and these in turn ensure that the laws continue to serve capital. Whoever dares to challenge that order is swiftly isolated, discredited, or destroyed. Money buys influence. Influence dictates decisions. Decisions feed inequality, and inequality produces more money. A closed loop in which the people, even when they vote, never decide. They watch and applaud a theater where history repeats itself with different actors but the same script. This is the formal democracy Marx spoke of, the appearance of choice that hides the real absence of power. Examples abound. Self-proclaimed popular governments that hand indigenous lands to mining, loosen environmental laws, cut health and education to protect bank profits. In every case, politics is reduced to the executive arm of capital. Marx was clear: to fight for representation without transforming the economic foundations is to fight in vain. As long as the proletariat accepts the rules of the bourgeois game, it is condemned to lose, because the game was designed for its defeat. Every reform within capitalism stumbles against the iron wall of its structure. Political power does not command, it obeys economic power. And where inequality is extreme, authentic democracy cannot exist. Only a masquerade that keeps hope alive to prevent rebellion. That is why the indignation you feel must not remain a lament but become consciousness. Marx did not merely denounce the fraud, he offered a way out. Emancipation is not won in parliaments but through the collective organization of workers. An autonomous power, born from below, that does not depend on bourgeois institutions or their rules. That is the concrete and radical alternative, building a popular power capable of replacing, not reforming, the system that oppresses. History teaches that revolutions are not accidents, but the fruit of organized consciousness. When the people grasp the real nature of power and act accordingly, the machinery of capital trembles. The powerful fear one thing, that workers stop believing in them and start believing in themselves. Revolution, therefore, is not the chaos they paint for us, but the recovery of what was taken from us. The sovereignty of those who produce wealth, the dignity of those who live by their labor, and the awareness that no master is eternal. History in motion. For Marx, history does not advance by consensus or benevolent reforms, but by conflict. Class struggle is its engine, the material force pushing humanity toward new forms of social organization. It is not a matter of isolated protests or strikes, but a deep process of collective consciousness, in which workers discover that their emancipation can only be built together. That consciousness, economic, political, and moral, is the weapon that turns indignation into power. Overcoming capitalism is not fantasy, but a historical necessity. The system generates its own ruin: extreme inequality, recurrent crises, dehumanizing exploitation. Each technical advance, each concentration of economic power, intensifies its contradictions. And those contradictions cannot be resolved within capitalism, but against it. When wealth and misery grow so obscene, the existing order can only sustain itself through violence, or collapse before a social revolution. That revolution, for Marx, is not reduced to seizing a palace or changing rulers. It is the construction of a new mode of production, where essential means belong to the community and not to a minority. A society where labor ceases to be enslavement and becomes creative activity. Where distribution is guided not by profit but by human needs. In a word, the abolition of private ownership of the means of production. Marx knew this transformation would not occur without resistance. The elite would not surrender its power out of moral will. It would use everything: repression, censorship, propaganda. Hence his insistence that the conscious organization of the proletariat is the indispensable condition of victory. Without political education, without strategy, without unity, the revolution can be diverted, co-opted, or destroyed. As long as the people keep believing the system's promises, they will remain trapped in its game. Only mobilization, education, and the construction of real alternatives can break that cycle. This is Marx's essential message. The emancipation of the workers must be the act of the workers themselves. Neither bourgeois parties, nor parliaments, nor enlightened reformers will free the people. Liberation will arise only from the organized, collective, and conscious action of the working class. To grasp the depth of this thesis, it is not enough to read it. One must look to history. For history is not a museum of dates but a battlefield. Written there are the struggles and defeats of the oppressed, the partial victories that cracked the bourgeois order. In the 19th century, Europe trembled with the first workers' uprisings. Strikes, unions, and the fight for the 8-hour day were the first heartbeats of the modern proletariat. And in 1871, the Paris Commune rose as the first concrete experience of popular power. Workers took the city, established an administration based on direct participation, abolished privileges, and proposed a new social order. The bourgeois state answered with blood. The Commune was crushed, but its flames survived. Marx called it the finally discovered form of the dictatorship of the proletariat, the first real form of workers' self-government. Since then, history has been filled with echoes of that experience. The workers' revolutions of the 20th century, the Russian Revolution, the mass strikes during the Great Depression in the United States, the peasant and labor struggles in Latin America. Each, in different contexts, confirmed Marx's central thesis. Collective organization is the only force capable of limiting capital and winning real rights. Every social gain, decent wages, a limited workday, universal suffrage, public education, was the fruit of struggle, not the system's benevolence. And every setback proves the enemy has not slept. Capital reorganizes, the state adapts, repression modernizes. That is why the battle continues. Not in speeches or at the ballot box, but in workplaces, in neighborhoods, in the consciousness of the oppressed. As long as inequality exists, history will keep moving. And its direction will depend on whether workers recognize, once again, that the power they seek already lies in their own hands. History does not end, the struggle continues. No popular victory has ever been granted without a fight. Every advance of the people has met the fury of the elite. Coups d'état, economic sabotage, repression, media manipulation. The bourgeoisie responds with violence whenever workers threaten its rule. These facts, repeated throughout history, confirm Marx's central thesis. Class struggle is the true motor of history. And every promise of change within the system's framework without confronting it is an illusion. Workers' victories are not born of benevolence, but of consciousness, unity, and mobilization. Every right won was wrested through effort, strikes, prison, and blood. And with each advance, capital strikes back to regain its power. Thus history is made, an unceasing dynamic of offensive and resistance. Hence Marx's insistence. The political organization of the proletariat is not a matter of choice but a historical necessity. Only through it can the flame of emancipation be kept alive. Understanding this process is vital to avoid the traps of alienation and false consciousness. The people must know both their strength and their enemy's strategies. History is not a dead lesson but a living warning. Capitalism is not a stable system. It is a battlefield in constant motion, where bourgeoisie and proletariat clash again and again for control over life itself. This is the dialectic of exploitation. With each technical innovation, the system deepens inequality. With each rise in productivity, labor becomes more precarious. With each promise of progress, millions are thrown into misery. Science and technology, the fruit of human ingenuity, are appropriated by capital to multiply profits, not to liberate humanity. The result is always the same: abundance for a few, scarcity for the many. Marx understood that within this cycle lies capitalism's self-destruction. Its own contradictions drive it toward the abyss: recurring crises, unbearable inequalities, structural exclusion. Each crisis reveals what the system tries to hide, that its survival depends on the exploitation of workers. And when that exploitation reaches its limit, the conditions for transformation become inevitable. In contemporary politics, this dialectic takes new forms but keeps its essence. Parties that simulate antagonism, governments that proclaim themselves of the people, while serving financial elites, parliaments that legislate to keep the structure of domination intact. Political representation remains the mask of inequality. Only an organized people can break that siege. That is why Marx places class consciousness at the center. Without it, anger scatters, protest fades, energy dissolves at the ballot box. With it, the people understand their position, identify their enemies, and forge a strategy for liberation. Class struggle then is not only economic. It is also political, ideological, and cultural. It runs through the whole of social life, defining who commands and who obeys, who enjoys and who suffers. Recognizing this is the first step toward any real project of emancipation. Marxism, with its materialist view of history, is not a closed doctrine but a living tool. It allows us to understand the present and act upon it. It reveals that only the overcoming of capitalism, through organization, consciousness, and collective action, can build a society free of exploitation. That is history's promise, not resignation but transformation. This is not the end of a speech but the beginning of a path. The resistance continues. May these words serve as fire in the consciousness of those who work, produce, and create. Because the real power, the only power that can change the world, resides in the hands of those who build its wealth. And when those hands unite, history will move again.